Hey there guys, and welcome to this edition of Gearist TV. On today's episode, we're going to be talking to you about the GOrun Ultra from Skechers. If you've watched any of our reviews of Skechers products in the past, then you know that Skechers is no longer just a fashion brand. They've made a legitimate entry with the Skechers Performance division into the running shoe game, the high performance running shoe game. And like any really good company, good forward-thinking company in terms of design, they're really not satisfied with just kind of resting on their laurels, sticking with what works and letting that be that. What they've done is they've tried to go with market trends, but not just market trends. They tried to go with the desires, what really people truly want, not just what is a trend. And so in that, they've gone from having shoes that are these are still shoes that are high performance. We'll be running the Boston Marathon this coming weekend with, say, like the Go Meb Speed 2. They've gone from shoes like that, which have low drops and are really, really speedy, and now they're going into the Maximalist, the big cushion. Now, there's not a ton of stack height on this, which we're going to get to in a second, but they're really going with a lot of people looking for a lot of cushioning for their feet, and that is where the GOrun Ultra comes in. So the first place we're going to start is talking about the outsole and also the midsole. Now, while in this shoe there are two very, very distinct parts, I feel like they're so closely related and work so closely together that it's worth talking about them at the same time. On top of that, both the materials are very, very closely related cousins, so why not talk about them like that? So the first thing is that the midsole, this red part here, right below the upper, is made from Resilite. Now, Resilite you've seen in other shoes that Skechers has made, including the GOrun, the GOrun Ride 3, the GOrun 3. All these shoes, Resilite is the material they use. It is an injection molded compound with memory retention. Now what that means is that your foot breaks it and it breaks into your foot. It's really great for a nice comfortable feel depending on your foot function and how your foot sits in there. It's really nice. On the outsole here, this kind of gray part, which is a little dirty, so pardon me, on the outsole, this is made from Resi Grip, which is a very, again, very close cousin of the Resilite. It's a little bit firmer, a little more rugged, but on top of that, it's also stickier because it's actually porous. Now, we're going to talk about that in some of the kind of traction and ride sections of this review, so stick around for that. As with all the shoes from Skechers Performance, the GOrun Ultra uses M-Strike technology, which, as you can see, is this kind of softly, gently rockered shape, which is meant to really encourage a mid-foot, forefoot strike in the shoe. Now, if you're looking for the part of this review where we talk about the cushion, hang in there, it's coming very soon. Now, on the outsole, we see these Go Impulse sensors here, these lugs, basically. Now, there are 30 of these guys that are quite deeply cut. I'll hold it up to the camera, though I'm not so sure how well you'll be able to see that. These are quite deeply cut. Now, this is great for traction, but I should say this ahead of time. This is not a trail shoe, but Skechers does refer to this as a great multi-surface shoe. So it works well, and a lot of people have been running this off-road, including myself, to see what the hype was about, kind of to see how it performed on trails, because I knew that's where a lot of people would be using it. So again, these 30 lugs on the bottom here are really arranged in rows, which you can see there. They're kind of arranged up to the middle of the arch in 2-row sections. Now, what's really cool, and this is a very, very subtle little element that I think makes the shoe a lot of what it is, you may be able to see, I'll hold it back here, I think you can see it better here, and then right here. The outsole right up where it meets the midsole kind of dips, so it's actually almost like a wave shape. Now, what's great about that is that it thins out the outsole, which is a little more, again, durable and rugged, and that makes it a little more stiff than the midsole, but they wanted to keep that flexibility going through the outsole into the midsole. Those flex grooves make this thing very, very bendy. Look at that. This is considered to be a very cushioned shoe, but yet it can do this with no sweat whatsoever. You don't even have to push very hard. I mean, it's crazy. So those flex grooves right there, really well thought out, really well designed, and a very subtle feature that I think a lot of people may miss on this. That also adds, and we're going to talk about this more in the ride section, that adds to the traction because it allows this shoe to bend and flex over rocks and to grab onto things a lot better. Now, before we get into talking more about the midsole of the GOrun Ultra, I should comment on the drop because some of you guys are really hung up on the details, including myself, and that's okay. That's okay. Own it. So the measurements of stack height are 23 millimeters of stack in the forefoot, 27 millimeters of stack in the heel, and 29 millimeters of stack right in the midfoot. Now, you might think, and that obviously gives it that rockered shape, but you might think that that makes for a bump kind of feeling right under the arch, but it really, really doesn't. Honestly, it's kind of surprising. I think a large portion of that is due to the fact that this piece of material here that you can see, which sits over top of the strobel board, that piece of material right there is really, really cushy. There's probably 3 to 4 millimeters of just kind of padding right there. Now the GOrun Ultra does come with removable sock liners. We're going to talk about that a little bit more in the upper because it does add to the drop a little bit. I did the majority of my miles sans sock liner, as you can see there, and this piece over the strobel board area is very, very soft and padded. So it's going to be comfortable without socks, should you want to run that way. Now, as I mentioned, since Resilite and Resilite, both have memory retention, that means that there's going to be a tiny bit of a break-in period. For me, I honestly felt like at 10 miles I was good to go. It wasn't any big deal. I felt like I was right at home in the shoe. So it's not a huge break-in period. Now, in terms of durability, the Resigrip on the outside, it does a pretty good job. It's not the same thing as like injection blown rubber or something like that. So it's not quite that durable, or carbon rubber. As you can see here, I'll hold up. These have about 50 to 60 miles on it. As I'll hold up there, you can maybe see a tiny bit of breakdown right in that area. But again, this is with 50, 60 miles, and this is definitely on trail as well as road and everything like that. The grip is really nice and solid. It's not great on ice, but as we've talked about before, no shoe, except for shoes that have bits that are meant to kind of cleats grab into ice that are either hard plastic or like carbide or steel or something. No shoe really grips well on ice, but it does well in snow and things like that. As for durability of the materials themselves, I feel like the springiness and the kind of bounce of the Resilite and the Resigrip, the kind of springiness, would have well outlasted the tread itself. I think you can, if you have a pretty clean gait, probably get around 350 to 400 miles of this. Again, depending on how clean your gait is. Let's talk about the upper. So the upper of the GOrun Ultra is basically a combination of synthetic overlays and 4-way stretch mesh. Now, as you can see here, this is where the majority of that stretch comes, and I'll put my hand in so you can see how much stretch that guy has. It's pretty impressive up there. This area is called the vamp. Now, what's cool about this is that while some other companies may put a little bit of a stretch panel on the medial and lateral forefoot, they've put it in the vamp, which allows for an overall stretch across the top of the foot like that. This is going to go, obviously, commensurate with the lacing, but it makes for a pretty roomy toe box. We're going to talk about that a little bit more in the fit section. The vamp is stitched directly up into the tongue, and the tongue is kind of made of an almost neoprene-like material. It does a nice job of drying out quickly. I didn't exactly take it through any creek crossings or anything like that, but it does do a nice job of drying out quickly because it did get wet on some snowier runs that I took it on. The tongue itself has a nice amount of padding. I feel like they could probably get rid of some of this synthetic overlay, but we're going to talk about that a little bit more in some of the construction elements later. The toe bumper right here is made of that synthetic overlay, kind of a pleather, and it's just enough for a good amount of road running. It's going to protect your toes enough, and actually it holds up pretty well on trails. It's not super beefy, but it is definitely something to protect your foot. Now, the heel cup and the heel counter. Since this shoe, you know, a lot of shoes will sit, the heel and the foot will sit down inside the midsole, so what you see on the outside material coming up on the sides is actually cosmetic and makes the drop look a lot higher than it is. In this shoe, the foot actually sits on top of this material rather than down in. Now, this doesn't give it as well-defined a heel cup as in some other shoes. Now, in the sock liner has more of a cupped shape to the rear of it, but in this, it sits right on top. The heel counter, in turn, is not quite that stiff, but it is very traditional in its shape, and it stays well in place. It keeps the foot very comfortable. Now, I tend to be very comfortable in pretty much anything because I use the angle of my running to account for a lot of that stability. But if you're really keeping your foot flat on the ground and sliding, you'd probably be pretty comfortable, and there's a lot of room up here in the lacing, in the throat, to be able to cinch down and make sure that you're locking that heel in nicely. With Skechers being as apparently progressive in their designs as I think they are, I would expect in a version 2 of this shoe to see more heat bonding in terms of the overlays. These overlays are pretty traditional. They're just kind of stitched on synthetic pleather, you know, type of stuff that is indeed using just traditional stitching. Now, in some of their other shoes, they've used heat bonded materials that are lightweight, more lightweight. They're also going to keep the shoe with a sleeker line and things like that. And I wouldn't be surprised to see that making an appearance in more models coming up in the next year or so. The mesh on the upper is quite breathable. Full disclosure though, It hasn't been exactly hot here in Colorado. It's only April right now, so we're waiting on truly hot weather, but I think it probably is going to breathe pretty well. I've run on this up to about 70 degrees and been very, very comfortable. I am a huge fan, again, of this stretch in the vamp. It really does make for a lot of room and a lot of give in the toe box area, which is really nice. One of the things I've talked about and being a pet peeve of mine in the past is the amount of foam around the collar and the tongue. Now, this has a good amount, as I mentioned, in the foam. It's the tongue, rather. It's a really nice amount. It's not overly fluffy, overstuffed, or anything like that. It's also not overly thin. Around the, for a high mileage trainer, that is. Around the collar, there could be a tiny bit less, but in general, it's not super overstuffed, which is nice, and it still keeps the foot and the Achilles transition feeling nice and secure. Let's talk about the fit of the shoe. Now, since it does have a removable sock liner, the GOrun Ultra does have a lot of play in terms of the vertical volume. Now, if you're not convinced that a thin little piece of sock liner like this might have that much effect, try taking the sock liner out of your shoes and feel just how much more room you feel in there. That said, this gives a lot of forgiveness for people with maybe a larger volume foot. With that being the case, I never felt like I was swimming in the shoe, even with the sock liner out. The throat here, okay, the throat and the lacing gives plenty of room to cinch down if you need to. And on that matter, by the way, these laces do a great job. They held in really well for me. I never had a single untie at all. The heel counter, as I mentioned, if you lock it down properly, if you feel like it's a little bit loose, if you lock it down, it feels really nice. And that sock liner, again, is going to put a little bit more security, more of a cup feel in there, since this does sit on top of the midsole. Through the midfoot, great fit. This is just a great fit all around, and sizing is dead on. This is an 11, and 11 is what I wear and everything else, and this is really accurate to that. Finally, the toe box of the upper is excellent. Now, there are certainly shoes that are a little more anatomical in the toe box area and maybe even allow for a little more splay kind of vertically, or excuse me, horizontally this way. But there's a ton of room in this, especially with the stretch of that vamp. It allows your feet to flex up like this and all over the place. Lots of nice room in that. And while I felt it on the side of my foot, it was like it wasn't even really there. So the toe box is something that I think a lot of people are going to really like in this. According to Skechers Performance, the GOrun Ultra has 65% more cushioning than the GOrun Ride 3, which is already kind of a cushy shoe. Now, what's great about Resilite, and likewise its close cousin Resigrip, is that it doesn't, while it might deaden the ground feel a little bit, it doesn't necessarily deaden the response very much, because this is kind of a hybrid material, kind of a rubber EVA compound that's mixed together, and that makes for a really quite responsive shoe, and it gives you that pop that otherwise might be lost in something that is simply EVA cushioning. Now, with that said, the ground feel is quite muted, a little bit more muted for my personal taste than I might otherwise want. But keep in mind the purpose of this shoe. It's to go run ultras. Wow, that's like the title. Go run ultra marathons, run long distances over flat terrain, over varied terrain. It's meant to protect your feet by way of cushioning. I personally like a little more ground feel, but I was really quite surprised at how much I still got response and speed from this shoe. As we talked about earlier, the flexibility of the GOrun Ultra is quite surprising. Now, this again gives a lot of agility over varied terrain, a lot of rocks and things like that. And again, off-road, this thing's abilities are quite impressive. Now, you're certainly not going to feel every rock and pebble as you would in a more minimal down to the ground trail shoe. And by the way, that's not by way of a rock plate, because there is no rock plate in this. That is by way of the cushioning. You're not going to feel all those things, but still you're going to get that response and that pop and that flexibility that we mentioned earlier that gives this thing the ability to shape to the different parts of the terrain that you might run into. The final thing that I'll mention about the Ride is that this thing can go. I was quite surprised, honestly. I really expected something with so much cushioning and something that muted the ground feel like that. I expected it to not go anywhere. I expected to give energy to it and really not get it back. But thanks again to that material and the flexibility, again, it's going to allow your foot to flex and really go where it wants to go. It has quite a bit of pep. It was pretty impressive. No, it's no racing flat or anything like that, but it certainly does have way more pep than you would expect from this, and it's a legitimately peppy shoe and speedy shoe if you give it to it like that. Running the GOrun Ultra was a really interesting experience for me. I am, again, typically someone who wants a little bit more from the ground feel, but I was really impressed by the get up and go that this shoe has. The general upper and construction are really well done, and even if it's a little bit traditional, I'm excited to see what they come up with next in terms of this. The durability may leave a tiny bit to be desired, but it's not a huge deal unless you're crushing down super technical terrain every day that's going to rip this up and probably rip up most shoes anyway. Again, this is going to hold up to a lot of shoes in that trail category, even though it's not a trail specific shoe. Probably the biggest drawing point of the GOrun Ultra is its price. It is $80, and for a shoe that gives you all the things we've talked about here today, that's kind of a price that you can't really resist. So if you have a hankering to try them. It's only $80 if you're out that much. It's also going to be something that you can put high mileage on. It's going to be something that you can hit some trails up if you'd like to as well. Definitely get a pair of these shoes on your feet. If you've never been into the hyper cushioning before, check it out. Maybe it's something that you'd really like. Now let's get into the star ratings. First off, construction. We give it 4 stars. Really well put together, and while it does use some traditional methods of construction, it's a really well built shoe, and it's probably not going to break down on you very quickly unless you're running through a bunch of brush and brambles and things like that. Durability, we give it 3 stars. There's a little bit of a hit because I feel like this material, if it had some more traditional rubber in certain places on it, it might hold up a little bit better. Not a deal breaker because it's still going to last a good amount of time, but if you're crushing down some pretty hardcore trails, this might break down a little more quickly and wear through on the sole a little more quickly than you'd want to. Comfort, 4 stars. Really very comfortable. A little soft for my taste personally, but again, this is a shoe meant for high mileage and for keeping that foot comfortable over those miles. For me personally, I like that ground feel. It's a little more firm, so this runs a little soft for my taste. For fit, we're going to give it 4.5 stars. The fit is all around excellent, especially for my foot. Even times when I felt like I was going to be a little bit, it was going to be a little swimmy on me, it wasn't because of the stretch and the ability to tighten the shoe down appropriately. For weight, we give it 3.5 stars. It comes in at 9.1 ounces for a men's size 9 and I think 7.1 ounces for a women's size 6 or 7. It's a pretty decently weighted shoe, but I feel like with getting rid of some materials on the upper, some of these synthetic overlays, they could shave a little bit more weight and easily get it down below 9 ounces for a men's size 9. Performance, we give it 3.5 stars. Now, as I mentioned, this shoe has a lot more performance than you would expect, and when I say performance, I mean in terms of kind of speed and pep and things like that. It is definitely more poppy and peppy than you would expect, but that cushion still deadens the ground feel, and so it doesn't quite perform the way that I personally would want it to. Now, that is no mandate on the shoe itself. That's just my personal opinion. So all those numbers round out to a 3.8, so we'll round it up to an overall 4.0 star score. Before we go, guys, I'd like to know if you've tried the GOrun Ultra or any other super cushion shoe. Please leave your answers in the comments section below, and we'll talk about it next time. Thank you guys so much for watching this episode of Gearist TV. Don't forget to like and favorite this video. Just click the like and favorites down there and up there and all of that. Like and favorite this video. If you've got any questions or comments, please leave them in the comments section below. And by all means, don't forget to subscribe to our lovely channel. All those of you that have been subscribing lately, thank you so much. There are promotions on the way, so stay tuned. Also, don't forget to find us on all the social media outlets, Instagram, Facebook, Pinterest, Google+, all these guys. Find us, let us know what's going on, and say hi. We'd love to hear from you guys. Always, please visit Gearist.com. Thank you guys so much for joining us today, and we'll talk to you next time.